quorum, right?
We have a quorum, and it is 5:03.
We've talked about that.
Good evening. Calling the Committee on Fiscal Affairs to order. The agenda for today, while not long, has some interesting items on it, so let's move forward. Approval of the minutes for the meeting of September 3rd, 2008.
So moved.
Second? Anybody? Okay.
Yes,
Second?
yes,
Second?
yes.
Okay.
Yes, yes.
All in favor?
Sorry.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Now we'll move on to item B, which is a resolution to accept the new investment policy and guidelines. I believe Janet Crone, our Chief Investment Officer, will make a brief presentation, and then we'll move forward with the resolution.
Well, first of all, I'd just like to thank Chair Loda and the members of the Subcommittee on Investments, Vice Chancellor Malavi, and Barry Kaufman for their commitment and support throughout this process, and it was a process. And as a result of their very thoughtful review, we have some recommendations that are incorporated into an investment policy for your review and consideration, which include recommendations for a 5% real rate of return objective, a new spending policy which would permit up to 5% of the average market value of an account based upon the preceding 12 quarters. It includes an asset allocation with 3 new asset classes, emerging markets, alternative investments, as well as real assets. It also permits a governance structure that allows the subcommittee on investments the authority to act on items of importance and in a timely manner. And that basically summarizes the changes from the previous policy. We believe that the recommendations strive for excellence in endowment management, and we're pleased to submit this policy for your consideration.
Are there any other comments from the Chancellor before we move on? No? Questions?
I have some
Kate?
questions.
Sure.
Section D, where we're looking at second paragraph. In addition, the Vice Chancellor for Budget and Finance may, after consulting with the chairperson of the subcommittee, authorize action of portfolio issues that require immediate action but cannot wait until the scheduling of a meeting of the subcommittee, which we know is going to be on a quarterly basis. All such emergency actions shall be reported to the subcommittee at its next meeting, which would be quarterly. If there's anything that's going to be required for immediate attention, I don't think we should be waiting to be notified until the next quarterly meeting.
You will be notified immediately upon actions taken by me in consultation with the
Okay,
chairperson.
so that has to be amended.
Well, we would amend the guidelines to reflect immediate notification of all subcommittee members.
In writing or how?
In writing.
In writing, yeah.
In writing.
I look at rebalancing is okay, but when we go to Section 9, manager hiring and firing, I'm not pleased with retaining managers after an evaluation with a minimum of 3 to 5 year periods. I think in light of the turbulence of markets today, holding on to a manager for 5 years can be very detrimental to us. So I would like to see that amended for a 2 to 4 year period. Even 2 to 3 years good.
Well, if I can, I'm not certain that it doesn't preclude us from acting immediately on any manager at any time for a cause. That we wouldn't have to wait the 3 to 5 years. If there was cause to eliminate a manager, we would not wait to eliminate a manager. It doesn't give them a maximum of 3 years unless there's something that I'm missing about that.
There would be many factors, and it's ultimately up to the discretion of the committee.
Is it up to the discretion of the committee
for any reason
as a whole, or up to the chair and
No, those would
the
be
vice
committee
chair?
actions.
Okay.
Selecting and dismissing an advisor would be an action.
But
as a
why would you
committee.
want to keep a money manager managing the account for up to a 5-year period?
What's
If you're happy with the manager, why would you want to keep it for up to 5 years? To me, in my estimation, it makes them fat and happy, and they can stagnate.
So you're looking for term limits, is that what you're
I'm not
saying?
looking for term limits. I'm just saying, no one should have control of anyone's money that long period of time without constant reevaluation. So I say 2 to 3 year period. If you don't want to go out and look for new managers because of the time constraints and cost constraints, then give it a 4-year cap.
I think you're right, but I think the language, trustee facility says a minimum over 3 to 5 years. So it could
Right.
be
Any time period
time
within.
before then.
Just take out the 5. Make
Yeah,
them
you
happy.
could just end the sentence at periods. You don't have to talk
Okay.
about years. I mean, the whole thing gives you discretion to do
Sure.
whatever is
Time period,
appropriate.
period.
Yeah.
All right,
You
over,
don't just end
over an
the
appropriate
sentence where
time
it says
period.
appropriate time period.
Right.
Okay.
Let's see, what else?
What does a watch list mean, if I may, just while we're on this section?
Watch lists, right now there are so many of them, where
We're all on a
investments,
watch
every one of us is on the watch list. No, that's if any of the money managers and portfolios that they're managing are not performing well, they haven't done well over a period of time, they may be up for review. There may also be investments in the portfolio that the client may be very disturbed about, and that leads me to B, leverage and derivatives. You know that's a bad thing with me. I know we're looking at a target of 5% with policy ranges from 3 to 10%. In light of today's times, I really don't want to see us involved with anything in derivatives. And we can revisit this and put an amendment sometime in the future. But does anybody here in this room ever hear of the name Robert Citrone?
Me? I do.
Okay,
He was my client. Orange County.
that's right. He was the treasurer of Orange County. In 1994, Orange County went bankrupt because he took advice from his money managers, and the pension fund went bankrupt, all because they invested in derivatives.
They were interest rate swaps.
Excuse me?
Well, interest rate swaps.
But it was,
But
they were highly leveraged in derivatives.
Right, but with each manager that we consider, that's one factor that we will be looking at. I mean, I think in this, particularly in this market environment, we feel that we would be handicapping a manager by not giving them all the tools at their disposal. So short selling, and there are, there are derivatives and there are derivatives. And I think that,
Yeah, you talk about real assets.
Yeah, I think trustee Facility understands the derivatives market. I think, derivatives today are such a wide umbrella. It
Big
can
basket.
mean anything from just very simple modifications where you derive the same benefit from an existing asset that, so portfolio managers are using some of
Oh,
these
yes.
tools. And I think what you are getting at, the abusive use of
Speculation.
of derivatives. And with
Yeah.
respect to the watch list, I mean, that's a common
Yeah.
term that is used even when a new fund is put on
Or one's performing well.
online to just see its performance. And it typically has a negative connotation. You put something on a watch list if you think there's been underperformance or higher fees or
For the money
not meeting
managers.
its benchmark and so
Right.
forth. I think that's the way that you envisage using
right,
it here as well.
exactly.
I'm just, I've been in the business for a long time, and I think because of the funds are endowments, they should certainly be conservative. And we look at the turbulent times, and I could see maybe 3 or 4 years from now, but I certainly don't think between now and the next 18 months.
Hope sooner.
So you
Yes,
just
Tim.
want the excessive use
Sure.
of derivatives, obviously, because just about everybody is using some kind of derivative.
Oh, yeah.
today, so.
But not the catch-all phrase.
Right.
On the first page, item 3C. The Subcommittee on Investments shall be composed of trustees appointed by the chair of the Board of Trustees. Usually, we've had a faculty member recommended to the chair for appointment on this committee, and this language excludes that.
I didn't see that. Didn't catch that
I'm sure
one.
that was inadvertent.
One faculty member? Is that
Yes.
the tradition on this committee?
Yeah.
Yep.
Always been one faculty.
Appointed by the chairperson?
Well, by the chair of the U of S to the chair of the board for appointment to the
Yeah,
committee.
you get,
Right.
but you're recommended, yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Are there any other questions, comments, statements? Okay. I move the resolution with changes to section 3D, section 9, and section 3C, as we discussed in this meeting. Move the motion.
Second.
Second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next sections, two sections actually, we probably should look at in total because they're intertwined. The section, item number C, item lettered C, and item D, the operating budget request, and then the resolution for tuition and fee schedules. With that, Chancellor or Ernesto, Ernesto has a presentation separate and distinct to go through and the actual budget presentation, which I think was handed out to everyone at the beginning of the meeting. Ernesto?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome, everyone. To tell you what you have before you, you have two resolutions. One resolution which includes the university's operating budget request for fiscal 2009-2010 for both senior and community colleges, and you also have a second resolution changing the tuition charges effective fiscal 2010, or in this case, the fall of 2008 semester. We advanced to you a copy of the Blue Book, which was the university's budget request document, which contained a significant amount of narrative as well as the tables associated with the requested numbers, the adjusted dates for the university, and the funding increases. I'm providing to you today a PowerPoint presentation which pulled out the key references, the key numbers, so we can review the situation. And I'd like to take you straight to the PowerPoint presentation and to begin on page 2. And part of this will be, what will be coming from me this afternoon is a narrative on exactly where we are and how we got there and what the outlook for 2010 and the actions that the university has taken in anticipation of the challenges that we face in the short and long term, and how the university is responding to that challenge. And I think it's obvious to all of us from the first dot point what this nation is going through and the economic turmoil that is affecting all of us, including the state and local governments. It's an historic moment and a significant crisis that is still unfolding, and no one quite knows exactly where to end or how it will end. There's a great deal of uncertainty that continues. What is not uncertain, what we know for sure, at least what we know for sure from the state of New York and the city of New York, or at least their minimum projections, is that for the state of New York, Governor Patterson is projecting a current year shortfall of nearly $2 billion and a shortfall in budgets of $12.5 billion in 2010. And just to give you a sense of just how bad October was of this year, in the end of August of this year, the governor was projecting a budget shortfall of $6.4 million. And in a mere 3 weeks, the collapse of Wall Street and the other financial markets created a shortfall of double that, of $12.5 billion. So that is what you could arguably, at this point, say is sort of the worst, the best case scenario. And what I mean by that is there is no there's no estimate nor projection that I have seen or heard that suggests that the short term is going to get any better. So I think that's what we're staring at, and that's what we're dealing with. The result of all of that has meant that in the current fiscal year 2009, CUNY has already lost nearly $82 million in city and state support, most of that coming in the form of state support. You'll recall that the state of New York started the adopted budget condition with a $17.7 million reduction. That was the budget that was adopted in April. Shortly thereafter, the governor invited the legislature on August 19th to reopen the budget. They did, and for the university that resulted in an overall reduction in support of $50.6 million. We were able to apply some one-time reserves to be able to reduce the impact to the campuses to 18.6, and thus the commitment of the university to protect the academic core and student services, i.e. replacing all the full-time faculty in direct student services, as well as continuing with our initiatives on mental health and graduate student health insurance were continued. Nevertheless, even after the governor reopened the budget in August, he invited the legislature yet again to return on November 18th to impose even further reductions. And you'll recall that the governor introduced a deficit reduction proposal that, among other things, authorized the universities to generate additional tuition revenue associated with a $600 increase in the resident tuition. The governor did that in part because he was contemplating even further reductions of $47 million in the current year for the City University of New York to deal with the budget problem. The governor introduced, however, and by the way, the governor introduced not only a one-year plan for dealing with the budget or the continuing erosion in 2009, but also suggested a fiscal plan for 2010. And that fiscal plan included a new policy on tuition from the executive. In the current year, the governor was recommending that tuition be raised not only to restore a planned reduction, but to also allow universities additional revenues to come back to make a modest investment program in the current year. And as a policy matter, going into fiscal 2010 and 2011, allowing an even greater share of the tuition revenue to come back. So the governor's proposal for 2010, for example, included a proposal to include $20 million of the tuition revenue returning to the university for an investment program. So the governor's executive plan was to make investments in the university through the tuition revenue. That, as you know, for those of you who've been around for a while, is a sea change in the way in which the state of New York governs higher education and higher education finance. In all other instances, whenever tuition was raised, it was only raised either to fill a hole completely or to fill it partially. So you either began a subsequent fiscal year flat, or you began it with less services. So students always paid more and received less. In this case, the sea change is that to the extent that revenue had to be raised, the governor was committed, and this would be consistent with the CUNY compact, although the percentages are a little bit different, that revenues would return for investment purposes, and that was a sea change. As you are, I'm sure, aware, the legislature was unable to reach any agreement on November 18th, and as a consequence, the proposals for increasing tuition in the current year are off the table, and the university is not making any recommendations for an increase in tuition in the current year. The governor said also that he would release his executive budget for 2010 on December 16th. We will know what that means. And I say we will know because I'm not entirely certain anymore. A few weeks ago, the governor has suggested a 20% return on the tuition proposal for CUNY. Given that the legislature was unable to address any of the budget challenges in the current year, it is uncertain whether or not having to roll that budget problem into 2010 would change the numbers for 2010 and whether or not the governor will make any additional recommendations beyond the tuition proposal. From what we have heard thus far, there's no change in the overall tuition proposal that he is likely to recommend, but I can't be certain that all the revenues that were contemplated to come back to the university will come back. So that's the scenario on the state side. That is our full expectation. It isn't always the case that we know weeks in advance what the governor's executive budget will say. We pretty much know now for sure that it will include reductions in state support for the colleges. to be offset by a tuition increase. On the city side, the mayor had proposed as part of the budget modification issued a number of months ago that in addition to the cuts that were already being implemented in the current year, which I should remind you, we started off with a $7.7 million shortfall at the community colleges. To that, the mayor recommended $5.1 million in reductions, of which we were able to moderate a little bit for the campuses, so we only implemented 2.5, and that is still being, by the way, considered by the city council. That is where we are in the current fiscal year. That same PEG program included a $9.5 million reduction for next year. So we're staring at almost $10 million in cuts for the community colleges next year, at least. And the reason I say at least is because the Mayor's Office of Management and Budget have already alerted us to anticipate further erosions in the budget when the mayor submits his January plan. So the situation will get worse, at least from the mayor's perspective, in the current year. And the reason I say that is because the city council will ultimately have to enact and adopt and approve any of the recommendations that the mayor makes. But again, it's all going in one direction and one direction only. So that's the gloomy context that we're looking at. And as I said earlier, the question is, how will CUNY respond? Whether or not we will respond in a manner that generates the resources so we can maintain the stability that we all seek and the investment that we know we all need, or not. And I think this budget message, as you will see, posits that the university needs, particularly to meet its growing enrollment, continuing investment, cannot afford a budget situation that requires it to begin contracting all the gains that it has made over the past several years. And so you're going to read that the compact continues to be the primary vehicle, the vehicle for the university, but in this sort of state of emergency, if you will, we're approaching how it gets funded, at least in the current year and in the short term, a little bit differently than we had anticipated, given the circumstances that we all know that we're in. Let me just go straight to it. On page 3, I just simply alert you to the fact that on the second dot point that we would ordinarily have had a compact proposal that would have sought the state of New York financing all our mandatory needs plus a share of an investment program. Since we now know for certain that the prospect of additional state support is none, and that we're likely to get, not likely that we will get significant reductions in state support, we are offering and proposing that the university's budget request be financed through a combination of all the things that we have said before. Philanthropy will continue to be a component of the compact. The university's productivity and restructuring initiatives will also be part of the compact. The continuing enrollment growth and the revenue that generates will continue to be a part of the compact. What will be different is, of course, be the tuition levels. Last year, we had come to this board seeking a 5% tuition increase in order to fund a component of the investment program. Given the circumstances we all face today, that proposal is now a 15% increase in order to generate the revenues that we need to fund all our continuing obligations as well as the investment program that we have. But an important sort of wrinkle when I say 15% on page 4, the board will be, the university is seeking authority for the chancellor to increase tuition by up to $300 a semester. And the reason it's the up to is because, one, we continue to believe that we would like to see that number come down. We would like to see an overall financial plan developed at the end of the process that does not require at the undergraduate resident rate that level. However, the level of uncertainty for us is such that we're not certain about that. We would like to have the authority and grant the chancellor the authority to go up to 600, but no more than 600, or 15% to deal with the investment program that we need and the budget challenges that we face. And we're asking for that authority now for 2 reasons. One, it enables the larger community as well as the student body of CUNY to know 8 months in advance what the tuition schedule is going to be. There's nothing worse than it being August and you're not sure what your tuition level is going to be. Historically, that's the approach that we have taken in advance. This will be the first time that we'll be, in effect, letting students know in advance what the likely tuition level is going to be. I think it's important to recognize that even within that level of of $300 per semester on page 5, that the level is still within the $5,000 maximum TAP award, so all students who are currently eligible for a full TAP award will see absolutely no increase in their charges as a result of this proposal. But the university is going beyond that. I think this is an important feature of this budget message, that along the lines of what the chancellor has directed us at the central administration to do, and that is, we know that there are many students at the university who will be covered through financial aid. We know that there are many students at the university who will find a tuition increase unpleasant in the same way they find going to the pump unpleasant, although these days I would take that back for a moment, maybe buying pizza. But nevertheless, it is unpleasant, but not an undue burden for the kind of investments that they're making. And there's this whole group of students that are sort of caught in the middle, and many of whom are challenged by this environment. And so the chancellor has directed us to come up with a menu of programs to be financed largely through the revenues from the compact, to do at least 3 things. One, to target aid to those students who are at risk of matriculation if that $300 per semester becomes a challenge. 2, create our own CUNY work-study program. We have a federal work-study program that works very well in assisting students to be employed on our campuses, and for those students who are in greatest need, for whom a job opportunity, albeit limited, can assist them in reducing their cost of education, is something we will try to develop. I think one of the favorites of everybody, regardless of the income scale, the cost of textbooks, is something that just angers people, whether or not you can afford it or not. And I think we're working with many in the administration here on the campuses to figure out a way to drive down and reduce the cost of textbooks, have additional voucher programs that are available to those students who need. So while one may be paying more tuition on the one hand as a consequence of this policy, on the other hand, they're getting a reduced cost of their education if you can drive down the cost of textbooks. And I think that that's a very popular idea. I met with the University Student Senate leadership over the weekend and invited the chairperson to assist the university in crafting a number of proposals, and they are putting together a small committee to assist us in doing that. For those students under any scenario who find it challenging to make a full payment, we have what they are called tuition payment programs in the university that stretch out the payments of tuition over a 4 or 5 payment plan. And it currently has an $18 fee associated with that. We will absorb the fee, and so that program will now be available free of charge to the students in order for them to stagger the payments and make it easier for them to meet the cost of education. And that's partly the way the university is responding to what we know to be a challenging environment for some of our students when they suddenly have to pay a 50% increase. All right, so that's the revenue side. We're looking to make an investment, and now what is it that we're trying to do? What kind of investment program? And I won't bore you with the details on our fringe benefits and energy. I think we all know what that means. And you'll see in the numbers later that almost half of our requests, half of our revenues are going to be needed just to maintain the cost of doing business and the infrastructure that we currently have in place. We do, however, have an investment plan, and that investment plan for both senior and community college totals $90.6 million. And as you can see on page 6 from the first 3 dot points, just in the broad strokes, the lion's share of it, $38 million, is for the flagship environment. And anchoring the flagship environment, in this case, are 2 things. Roughly 300 to 350 full-time faculty that will be hired as a result if we are successful in getting this plan financed, as well as a $5 million for the startup costs associated with the new CUNY School of Public Health, $26 million for improved student services that would include the financial assistance program I just reviewed, as well as all the things that you would have found in our previous budget requests. Remember, we had a budget request for 2009 that was not funded. And so many of the things that were, really good, positive proposals that came from the campuses last year are still really good, positive proposals. And they run the gamut of improved services for students with disabilities, to improve financial aid offices, particularly at this time where students are challenged to to meet the cost of college, and importantly also veteran services. We continue to revamp our veterans operation, certainly from the time that I was at CUNY when the Vietnam veterans were coming back. Thousands and thousands of New Yorkers will be returning who need services, and for which is very important, and we've already begun to do a lot of work with the federal government. We'll continue to do that, but it's very, very important that we not lose sight of the needs of our veterans. And the last point, everything that we all know here in terms of the laboratories and the need to maintain our laboratories, not everything is on the capital side of the house when it comes to facilities, and we need to have strong support there as well. And those are the three major points of the university's request. Let me just take you to page 8, just so you can just sort of see the numbers, all the numbers in front of you. I just sort of quickly reviewed the top two. I probably glossed over. I shouldn't have. I apologize. A Decade of the Science, which is another major component of the university's request. We have, science buildings going up on 3 of our campuses. The Advanced Science Research Center needs to ramp up. We are doing significant work with fellowship support for doctoral students in the sciences, and the resources that are requested here are necessary to continue and expand those programs. So you'll see on page 8 the $90.6 million to your right, distributed between the 3 areas that are reflective of the CUNY master plan. You'll see the numbers on the mandatory needs, and then you'll more importantly see the philanthropy, the funding sources. And I should add, if I didn't emphasize, we are asking the state of New York to finance and to provide some additional support. And we're asking them to target it in the area of a philanthropy matching program. We have reason to believe that, as part of the work we did with the Commission on Higher Ed, that kind of resonates when the state of New York doesn't have a whole lot of money to spread around. I think it's one of the things that they respond well to is some targeted investments that they can leverage some private support. So we're going to encourage them to do that, and by asking them to take the $5 million that we are proposing in philanthropy to fund the compact, and they can match that on a 3-to-1 basis in between the city and the state of New York, give us an additional $15 million in state support. So it is not a budget that is entirely driven by other sources, but as you can see, the largest amount there is the tuition component, followed by additional state support for philanthropy. We're asking the state to cover, consistent with the State University of New York request, a $100 increase in funding per FTE for the community colleges. We hope, and we know that even if it's not the case with the governor's executive recommendations, remember that this is not merely a proposal to the executive, this is a proposal to the executive and the legislature, so we invite the legislature to weigh in and support the community colleges, particularly as they see them as key access points and key workforce development initiatives. I think they've always been very significant supporters of age community colleges, and we hope that they will do so again. The next few pages are simply just for your own leisure, how the numbers work out that I just laid out between the city and the state. I'll just take you to the total on page 11. You'll see that we're asking for a total package of support of $165 million between the revenues generated from tuition, the revenues generated from state and city support. That number doesn't add up to the $175 million you saw earlier in terms of an investment package, because the rest of those things are funded through philanthropy and through base restructuring. So when you look at the page 8 and you see the total size of the investment program and the mandatory needs, you see 175.7, the $10 million being those 2 items that I just referred to. All right, so that's the budget request. And the question is, and not the question, we have talked about the $139 million in revenue that's being generated. And those revenues, I remind you, are largely from the tuition increase of up to $600 for the senior colleges and $400 for the community colleges. And as you will see, there's a number of some narrative there on some principles. And on page 13, the first principle, one of the first principles is that we develop a program that's comprehensive, that assists our most vulnerable students. That in the case of the community colleges, we have to be mindful that it is an integrated university, and we have to make sure that the resource level for the community colleges match the requirements of quality that are necessary for articulation and transfer to the senior colleges is one very important principle. And secondly, we have to be mindful, although not unmindful of that second principle, of the differential between the senior and community colleges. Right now, it's 1,200. If we had applied the same rate, the same number, to maintain that differential, it would have been 600. We believe that given a couple of things, given the fact that albeit the situation in the city is difficult, the budget challenges of the state are greater, and thus requiring a greater level of revenues on the state side. And on the city side, it is not so great. And secondly, we are sensitive to community colleges being access points, and we don't wish to go too far in increasing tuition beyond what is necessary to maintain an investment program. And to the extent they're not being cut at this point as significantly as the senior colleges, we believe that 400, or no more than 400, or up to 400, is an adequate amount for the community colleges. On the final page, on page 14, you'll see basically the numbers of our current rate at the community colleges going from 28 to 32, the senior colleges from 4 to 46, and the associated percentage increases for the rest of the schedule. And on the final two pages, just for illustration purposes only, just to show you where we are as a system versus our sister institution, the State University of New York, versus our competitors here in the city of New York, you'll see that both CUNY and SUNY remain highly competitive versus the rest of our competitors in the city of New York. And I think the numbers speak for themselves when even our proposed tuition is less than half of what it would cost to go to Monroe College, and even more than it would go to Marymount. And then on the last page, finally, the comparable numbers for the community colleges. You can still see the tremendous value at our community colleges. So that is the end of the presentation. I'd be happy, I'm here with my budget director. I want to thank Matt Sapienza for all the work the budget office did in putting this request together, and I'd be happy to take any questions. Thank you.
On page
John?
5, the bullets, how students will be assisted. Are these programs, well, let me put it this way. Once we pass this and if everything happens as we expect, will all students be able to avail themselves of these programs, or is it only for students receiving financial aid?
It would be for those students who are at risk of losing their matriculation. Now, that's a pretty wide berth there, I recognize that. For those students who already receive financial aid, that's the least likely source of students who would be eligible for the program, because they're already receiving substantial financial aid. There are many, I'll give you an example of students who get some financial aid, but only some financial aid. The group that I think of mostly are the independent student on the TAP schedule. That is, you could be an independent student, be 24, 25 years of age, be independent, that is, you're not living with your parents anymore, have an income of under $7,000, and still only get $3,000 for your maximum award, because the state of New York, something that Chancellor and I found out in detail, the state of New York has not changed the minimum schedule for that group of students in 25 years. So it is already the case that the very poorest students who are independent don't get financial aid. So that would clearly be one group. There are a number of part-time students who would also come to mind. But I think what we need to do as a system, and I work closely with Bob Patchett in the universe of financial aid directors, they're the ones who know better than anyone else who are those and what the criteria should be and ought to be. Some campuses, for example, have greater numbers of international students, for example, for whom we would direct private funds to than other schools. Other schools would have a greater proportion of part-time students. It is very hard for me at this point, except I would not focus on those who already get financial aid, and I would not focus on those who already, are relatively speaking well-to-do. But we have to have some criteria. We can't just say that the only criteria is that you filled out a financial aid application with the state and federal government. We have to find other ways, and that'll be the challenge between now and September or June and July when the tuition payments are required for us to, that's why I invited the Student Senate leadership, and I will invite, as you always give me sound advice on the Budget Advisory Committee of the Faculty Senate, to help us craft this program. It is not a program that we have yet developed. It's a program that we probably will need to develop, but we have time to develop it.
All right, I welcome, as always, the invitation for consultation and advice, because my fear is that students will not necessarily be aware.
Oh, they'll be aware. I made it very clear that we, both to the student media, to the student leadership and others, that, all the student media, for example, would be invited. We would have articles and promotional materials in all the student media, the newspapers on campuses, the radio stations on campuses. This is something that will be well-known on websites, that the university is committed to assure that no student is at risk of losing their matriculation. I don't think, I think students know where to go whenever they're being a little bit challenged, and I think this is not going to be a problem in terms of us promoting it.
I look forward to discussing it because I think some students are in need of more active advice than we might think. But, okay, thank you.
On page 7, the budget request, it mentions we're hiring 350 new full-time faculty. I assume that intends to be a net increase.
That is intended to be a net increase, yes.
And
We
how
want to
would
build on what we are currently doing.
And how would that be distributed between the community colleges and senior colleges? Is this just a senior college figure, or is it both?
No, that would be everyone. It would probably be, probably 2/3 senior, 1/3 community. I think that when I look at the numbers, most of the ratio problems that we have with the proportion of instruction taught by full-time faculty or at the senior colleges, there are some community colleges that fit that criteria, but I would think that a lot of it is at the senior colleges. In terms of the erosion that has taken place in the budget over the past 20 years and the erosion of full-time faculty, I still think that the senior colleges are disproportionately affected by that ratio that I just referred to.
Do you want to respond to Trustee Phillips about the community college investment program embedded?
Right. Well, there's a chance to indicate that this is an investment program for both senior and community. I remind you of the program of 2003, where we hired at least 300 new full-time faculty at the community colleges. That's also partly why it may be a little bit weighted toward the senior colleges. And secondly, it also includes a significant piece of the Decade of the Science, and that is largely a senior college research engine. And so to the extent that there's a little bit of a weight toward the Decade of the Science in those numbers, that would lend it toward the senior colleges.
So in terms of the community colleges, what sort of net increase could you comment a little more on that?
It'd probably be 100 to 150 net.
Manfred, there are some unknowables at this particular point, and prominent within that are the recommendations that are going to come from the mayor, which we do not know what that is. The only information we have thus far about the community colleges is the action taken by the governor that said that in this package for higher education, there would be proposed a 10% reduction in base aid to community college students. That disaggregates to about $270. So, and we don't know if that 10% will hold or whether it'll go down a bit. So something is speculative here between that number and the number that the mayor will propose. So whatever it is, we believe that there will be sufficient latitude if we go up to $400 to provide the equivalent of what we had in the community college investment program a few years ago. So the numbers are going to be driven by whether the 10% is reduced to a smaller number and how high the mayor intends to go, which will have an effect on the community college budget as well.
further comments? Simone?
I'll move, then, I'd like to move C and D together, since they really are an integrated whole. I don't think we need to read the whole resolution. We've had it for a while, but it's these resolutions that are before you.
I'll second it. Karen, you have one more question, I hear.
Yes.
I wasn't meaning to cut it off,
No,
I just
that's
wanted
right.
to
We
move
could
it,
talk
get it
once
on the
it's-
No, no,
table.
once it's
Actually,
moved.
supposed to be
Yeah.
moved and then discussed.
Theoretically, yeah, so-
Theoretically, right. That's,
Roberts isn't always right.
no. What is the procedure, given the fact that we're now voting to raise tuition up to a certain amount,
Right.
pending action is
State
by the
budget, city budget.
Right, the legislature and governor. When and how will the decision be made? Will we be involved in in making the decision of just how much the tuition is increased?
What we know the governor is going to come out with his executive budget on the 16th. And there will be at least a $600 tuition increase recommended, because we already know the governor has proposed $6.
Right.
And since that proposal, there has been a reduction in not an insignificant, and not insignificant levels at revenue. So we know we're dealing with a minimal value that may indeed go up. In addition, there may be other tag-ons to, not on the tuition piece, but on further reductions to the base operating budget. So there is a moving target here. What the board is authorizing tonight is that the university has the authority to, based on that information, to raise tuition up to $600. Obviously, we will work as hard as we can to find a financial path that would help to reduce that to a lower number, and however far we could go, we will. So I don't think it's necessary that, we just have to report back on what it is that we know from the legislature and what we know with the relationship between the governor and the legislature. But right now, it looks like the number is going to be 600, and we will do our very best to try to get it down some. I can't promise what that number is, because there are too many imponderables at this particular point, but we sort of know what the target is going to look like.
So basically, we're authorizing you and the chancellery
The
to make the
university,
decision.
right.
There'll be numerous meetings of this committee and of the full Board of Trustees by the time we get to springtime. Right. There being no further questions or comments, the motion's on the table. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you very much.
May I just say that this is a very difficult vote, of course, for the faculty, that I do support this, and that the University Faculty Senate Executive Committee voted to authorize me. It was a split vote, but a sizable majority vote. And I just wanted to report that. Thank you.
I'd like to add that it was the opinion of the majority of the executive committee that this university cannot reasonably suffer cuts in the budget, in its operating budget, that we need continuous new streams of full-time faculty hiring, that cannot be interrupted, that it's essential for the welfare of our students, that new faculty hiring.
Okay. Inside of our package that was delivered last Friday, we also have a memo from Janet about the investment update. I encourage everyone to read it. I enjoyed the graphics in the back and different. And I also want to thank the staff for getting all of this material out there last week and delivered to our homes or businesses or wherever they were delivered. That being said, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved. Aye.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Good meeting, Mr. Chairman.
Told you to be up by 6.
I can't believe it. Good. Very good.
No problem. Just give me a number.
You never know, what can I say?
Joe, I don't know who is unbelievable. What?